Thank you all very much for coming to this presentation. I do want to note that I'm using the phrase without a subject specialist advisedly here. We do have a librarian for Middle East and South Asia Studies. That's Dr. Philip McEldowney, and he's held that role for many years. Dr. McEldowney's background is in South Asian studies. He has deep expertise in that area, is familiar with Hindi, Urdu, and with Persian, but to a lesser extent with Arabic, or Turkish or Hebrew and other Middle Eastern languages. And my own background is in early modern Europe, and I'm the librarian for history and religious studies and share overlapping responsibilities with Dr. McEldowney, who's also the librarian for anthropology. So in this sense, we don't have the designated subject specialist with a background in Middle Eastern studies or the languages of the region. And that's sort of the sense in which I'm using this, this phrase. So I've kind of stated our problem, right? Even large research universities like UVA may not have a librarian whose job is to be that of Middle East specialist, or that's not their primary job, or specialists may be less familiar with some important vernacular languages or subject matter. The literature to date has tended to explore Middle Eastern and, I believe, area studies librarianship generally from the perspective of a specialist for whom this role or professional identity would be primary. And this is a case study of an institution where we've worked together to build Middle Eastern collections and support Middle Eastern scholars without necessarily having that kind of background. And hopefully this will be useful to others who might be in that role, and certainly useful to us to get feedback from you all. Just a quick review of the literature, because there are trends in the literature that play out in the UVA experience. And one is a tendency for Middle Eastern studies to wax and wane in terms of interest, depending on the so-called national interests of the United States. The discipline sort of took off in the 50s and 60s with the Cold War and decolonization. UVA's first classes in Arabic and Persian were taught in the 70s. There has been a growth in interest in the early years of the 21st century, especially after 9/11, 2001, and again recently. There are always questions about the relationship of an interdisciplinary field like Middle Eastern studies and other area studies to academic departments. Is there a need for a dedicated specialist? Can those be handled by other subject liaisons working with departments? Certainly, we've all heard, and the talk this morning certainly emphasized how we've all had to take on different duties, even various area studies specialists, especially learning new technologies or perhaps taking on other departments or fields of liaisonship. But the primary responsibilities in Middle Eastern librarianship seem to have remained pretty constant, and those would be collection development, metadata support, and research support in that order. And that's also what we've heard from faculty at UVA in terms of what they would desire if we did have a dedicated specialist. Precarity, financial constraints have certainly led to the just-in-time acquisitions paradigm. This is problematic for identifying and acquiring Middle Eastern materials, many of which must be acquired and shipped from overseas. And of course, I've already said that the ideal specialist would have this combination of training in Middle Eastern history and culture, language expertise, especially in Arabic, and training in librarianship. And this would be the primary focus of their job, but it's not always possible to have this. University of Virginia itself is a large liberal arts research university, 18,000 undergraduates and 9,000 graduate students. Its strength has long been since its founding by Thomas Jefferson, especially in Anglo-American studies. But it does field a PhD level program in Islam, the study of Islam in the Religious Studies Department. There are graduate students in Middle Eastern history as well. And there is a Department of Middle Eastern and South Asian Languages and Cultures, which I'll henceforth refer to as MESALC. That was broken off from a larger Department of Asian and Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures about a decade ago. MESALC includes teaching in Arabic, Persian, and Hebrew, and now we hear Turkish. The Arabic is one of the largest international languages of interest at UVA. There are about 250 students enrolled in courses in Arabic per the departmental website, and this has been true for about 15 years or so. There's also an MA level program in this department, and there's a MESALC focus within a global studies major, which was created in 2014. So what kinds of things have we done to develop collections without a dedicated subject specialist? A big one has been to rely on faculty guidance, and this includes fielding requests for materials, books, as well as videos, journal requests from faculty who teach in MESALC and other departments. In the past, we've circulated slips, title slips from the Library of Congress's Cairo office to faculty. And that has had mixed results. The faculty have not always been pleased with having to field slips. They've wanted more robust approval plans. And the problem with any kind of faculty guidance is, on the one hand, you're getting the materials that they presumably really want and keeping the budget under control. On the other hand, the faculty perceive it as inhibiting discovery. And again, it's not really a just-in-time model because many of these materials presumably have to be acquired from overseas. All faculty guidance, as I don't need to tell you all, has to be interpreted. There can be contradictory information. A faculty member could be more satisfied in a one-on-one interview, maybe less so when they get in a focus group. Competing priorities can be expressed. We do have book approval plans with LC Cairo, which we've now expanded in the last year, with Brill and with other European and American publishers. It has become especially important for us in recent years as Middle Eastern studies has grown at UVA to really understand the landscape. And this, of course, also means coming to conferences like MELA and engaging with more experienced Middle Eastern librarians. Part of this was to try to bring together faculty from different departments, including MESALC, history, religious studies, art history, and some others. We created a lunch in 2019 that included senior library administrators and subject liaisons. And this was really an important catalyst for changes to our approval plan, and also for getting a sense of needs sort of as a whole. There is a faculty member who's told us that there are over 50 faculty at UVA who teach in Islamic studies across various departments. We have not identified this number, even if we were to broaden the word Islamic studies to Middle Eastern studies. We've identified about half that number, but obviously job titles don't always reflect academic interest and specialization. So we're still working to understand the landscape. The lunch that I referenced was aligned with the university's increasing priorities in global education. This has been a phrase that's become very prominent at the university in about the last decade. And then diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, which have really become more prominent at the university in recent years, especially since the deadly 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. It's really important for us to sort of align with that language and piggyback onto it, frankly, to try to build Middle Eastern collections and draw attention. And that has been somewhat successful. Other subject librarians, for example, proposed this global initiatives group, which was intended to surface unmet collection needs with different sort of interdisciplinary regional studies. There was a lunch for Latin American studies and one for Indigenous studies. We were able to get Middle Eastern studies on the agenda. And so it's been really important to take a team approach. Dr. McEldowney and I are part of the Arts and Humanities Liaison team, which includes various subject librarians with responsibilities for different departments. We do have regular meetings. Our supervisor tries to coordinate an approach to collection building, and we work closely with our collections and acquisitions teams. So all of this faculty input, as I said, needs to be interpreted and squared against circulation data. What we've been able to see is that there is a high usage of materials in Middle Eastern subject matter. So if you look at the chart I've provided here, checkouts in fiscal years 16 to 21 either exceed or closely approach the number of books bought during the same period in these particular subject classes. Southwest Asian history, the study of Islam, and others. We don't know for sure, and we still need to work on refining our circulation data, whether these involve like a sort of rolling checkout of books as they're purchased, or whether these are primarily older materials. However, what we have observed is that there are few checkouts of vernacular language materials. So for example, there were only 148 checkouts of Arabic books in the past decade, and there are even fewer interlibrary loan requests for vernacular materials. These are low even in proportion to our community of researchers. And we're trying to understand that. Faculty might say that that's because we haven't gotten in the right books. We have expanded our approval plan with LC Cairo, and we will hope to see perhaps there'll be some changes once that happens. It's become problematic if there would be the creation of a dedicated specialist. So we're still trying to work that out. We had undertaken some real momentum in 2019. We expanded our approval plan, or began to work to expand our approval plans with LC Cairo. We felt like we had a pretty good understanding of the landscape, maybe better than we had before. And there was a stronger internal dialogue about Middle Eastern studies and its importance. March of 2020 had the potential to really throw a lot of that off. We closed the library for a couple months. Through the summer. Priority in purchasing was heavily given to electronic resources for course materials. And of course, the LC Cairo office also scaled back its operations. However, we did finalize our approval plans. We continued to survey faculty. We continued dialogue with LC Cairo. We got a sense of priorities for subject matter and countries of publication, especially if we had to keep a very limited budget. We were able to actually expand the approval plan with a greater budget than I had expected. And this might go against the theme of precarity, but I'll explain why we were able to do that in a moment. In the meantime, the university did continue to propose, new academic programs were proposed at the university with bearing on Middle Eastern studies. These included concentrations in history, as well as a graduate level program in pre-modern culture. This would be a PhD level program, and it involves Mesolk, history, religious studies, philosophy, and art history. One of their goals would be to hire a historian of medieval Africa. This would obviously have implications for Arabic language materials. There is, in fact, as I speak, a job out there for a pre-1900 historian of Africa. They have hired new faculty. There's an endowed chair of Islamic studies, an historian of Israel. I believe that's a 3-year contract. I'm not sure how long that person will be with us, but a new historian of Israel, a new chair of the Mesolk department. In the meantime, our acquisitions head has undertaken some benchmarking data. Again, we're sort of begun this fall to try to assess whether we've brought improvements and closed gaps with peer institutions that Dr. McEldowney has identified. And we have seen that at least for English language print books purchased in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a significant decrease in the number of titles not held by us, but held by these peer institutions. One thing that really helped keep the momentum up was the breaking of our big deal of journal packages with Elsevier. This one avowed intent of this was to open up resources to diversify our collections, and Middle Eastern studies did benefit greatly from the savings from this. Not everybody's able to break their big deal, obviously, but we did. And that did enable us to purchase some new electronic resources, Quranic Studies Online, the Quran Gateway, and a number of State Department records and other Western sources that had bearing on a wide range of Middle Eastern countries. Some future directions and questions for us would be these. One is to understand the recent supply chain problems that we've all heard about and problems with the US Postal Service in terms of their impact on acquisitions, and further the just-in-time or even just-in-case model. Is this a ongoing long-term trend, or is this a relatively recent thing that will be improved upon? I've already talked about the need to refine our circulation and benchmarking data and to better understand the scholarly community at UVA. We still need to understand, if we were to create a specialist position, what we would really need. In terms of languages, we've heard Arabic and Turkish would be paramount. In terms of what academic background would be desirable, and the desire strongly expressed by faculty for someone with knowledge of the publishing landscape in the Middle East suggests an experienced professional. On the other hand, this would be a great career, as was mentioned earlier today, for as an alternative academic career for graduate students in religious studies or history or other fields. I used to supervise some guys who worked on the library reference desk, would be great candidates for such a position. So we still need to understand that. So overall, I would say that our efforts have been essentially a refinement and a renewal of commitment of our existing approaches, not really a radically new direction. The situation will continue to be precarious. Perhaps in some ways we've been more fortunate than others in terms of finances to date. And I do believe that Middle Eastern studies will grow in its importance over the course of the decade. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Keith. That was great.
So
we'll move through the presentations and have the Q&A at the end. But I'm already seeing some engagement and comments in the chat, so I'm looking forward to bringing those up again at the end. So with that, we'll move on to our second presentation by Joan Weeks, who is the head of the Near East section and Turkic World Area Specialist at the Library of Congress, African and Middle Eastern Division, Near Eastern section, who is going to be sharing her presentation titled Mind the Gap, Developing Remote Instruction to Overcome the Staff Digital Divide.
Unmute myself and get the screen up here. That's in full screen. Stop sharing that for a second. I need to share the exact presentation rather than the other screen. And so I'm getting that up. There we are. So good morning, good afternoon. I'm very delighted to be able to present this to you today. I chose the kind of the metaphor, mind the gap, for my presentation today. Of course, it harkens back to the subway or tube platforms in London, but I'm looking at how people are stepping over this gap and looking at how I've developed remote instruction to overcome the staff digital divide or the gap as we had to move from an online to an online telework environment. And so we've had to make some significant adjustments. And I wanted to go through this kind of as the role of the instruction librarian that I was prior to coming into Amen. Until 2015, I was an instruction librarian, digital instruction librarian for our staff, the Library of Congress. And since 2015, I've had the unique, just profound privilege of heading the Near East section and working with amazing staff. But as we had to go into telework very suddenly, I wanted to look at this from the perspective of the instructor that I've kind of come into a role that I'm playing. And with that, I'm looking at this through the gaze of the instructor. In the presentation, I want to look at the learning outcomes that I'm hoping for, because I hope we can all look at this as we're addressing some of the digital divide that we see among staff in our workspaces, but also perhaps with students and faculty and with other colleagues in your workspaces. And one of the most challenging things at the onset is to recognize what are the causes and manifestations of this digital divide in the workspace. And I want to look at, well, now that I've identified the people who are in this digital divide, how do I provide a remote, safe learning environment for them? And they're adult learners, very reluctant sometimes to provide that information up front. It's hidden. I also want to look at how we can employ universal instructional design strategies to address some of these gaps that some of the staff, faculty, students may be actually involved in, and also particularly important to how do we advocate for digital equity, diversity, and inclusion in our workspace. because this is absolutely critical. Just a little background, the African and Middle Eastern Division of the Library of Congress is the major research center and custodial collections center for Africa, the Middle East, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. We have 3 sections. Our African section covers all of sub-Saharan Africa. Our Hebraic section covers Jewish studies worldwide. And our Near East section covers North Africa with Arabic language materials, the Middle East traditionally, Turkey, Turkic Central Asian countries, and Iranic or Persian Central Asian countries. We're located, when we're on site, in the Thomas Jefferson building on the 2nd floor of Haidalaya Vivat. But as 2020, March of 2020 came into being, the library closed due to the COVID pandemic. And this set in motion the onset of telework or administrative leave for staff who couldn't telework. And many of the staff were quickly able to adapt. They had their own computers and devices at home, and they began to telework immediately. And if they had other challenges, they received a special laptop early on with web conferencing applications. And others on our staff fell further and further behind in their work because they didn't have computers at home or had never used web conferencing or even experienced remote learning. And so teleworking during this environment opened up a digital divide among our staff. So I wanted to kind of go through with you the manifestations of the digital gap and kind of thinking through with you. And then at the end of this, ask you to put a couple in chat, perhaps that you've come across, because I think it's really important to recognize our staff and where they are with some of these gaps. One thing I found right off the bat that staff were unable, despite the fact they had the web conferencing software on their computer, they couldn't join in right off the start with a web conference like we're doing today in Zoom. And you would send instructions and it would roll around and they couldn't actually get in. Others would have work missing. You'd say, okay, send me that report, or emails were missing. They claim they couldn't find them. And perhaps they claimed to know how to do something, but there would be a mistake in the submission or long delays. You'd ask for, well, okay, just send me that Word document with this program that you're working on, and there'd be omissions. Or they can't really describe their problem with the technology. They'll just say something like, well, my computer doesn't work. And well, what is it? Is it your electricity is out, or is it because you can't connect to the virtual private network, or is it because your email isn't coming up? So that is kind of a tip off. And there's, particularly with adult learners, a lot of avoidance, not admitting they don't know something or blaming it on something else rather than their particular digital gap, and they hide the challenges. And I want to just point out how that happened just the other day in the reading room. I work with researchers, and this person came in and wanted to talk about how they would find out through Congress.gov or congressional legislation on some particular issues. And right away I wanted to show them how to use Congress.gov on his laptop so that when he could take it home, he could go through and do that remotely. And right away, I started noticing that his browser, Internet Explorer, was nonstop throwing up alerts. They were just cha-ching, 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 popping up. And this kept going on. It was pretty annoying and getting in the way of trying to use that browser to show him how to use congress.gov. And he said, well, I'm creating this database and I really want to capture all of these things. So I started to say, well, let's bookmark some of these websites. He had never bookmarked websites. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go back up to that and show him how to bookmark some websites. And then I wanted to show how he could download this congressional research report. That was a PDF. He didn't know how to download the PDF. And when I looked, he didn't have folders on his computer. I saw there were file management problems. Right away, I recognized there was a digital gap between what he was trying to accomplish, create some kind of what he was calling a database for the items he was researching, and just some what I would call basic digital literacy skills. So I worked with that. So they hide the challenges, and it's over to us to kind of uncover these and peel them back. And I've seen this, they don't know how to attach attachments to an email or things like that. So I'd like to just stop for a quick second. I'll put this out of screen share for a second, because I'd like to see if you could drop a couple of things that you've observed about people that may alert you to the fact that they're in the digital divide. How do you know somebody is on the other side of the digital world, the digital world that we're now in? I'll just give you about a minute or two. If somebody could drop something in chat and let me know if you've seen something there like that. Anybody see anything that you'd like to share? Can't log into or an ebook or a data set. Yes, I can't log in. I don't know how to do that, which is critical in a lot of libraries.
We have a number of people, Joan, that do come in, as you know, and try to look at the databases we have online, or essentially are trying to find some of our digital collections and really don't know how to navigate and get to it. And so you have to sit down and show them how to get into the subscription databases, from what area, or how to navigate the website to get to the digital content they're interested in.
That's excellent. We're going to touch on that a little bit about some of our interfaces that are so, we think they may be pretty straightforward, but to a lot of our users, they're very, very difficult and challenging to navigate. Well, I'll go ahead to keep this online with the rest of our presenters and continue my presentation from here. So there's also some organizational manifestations of the digital gap. For example, some places have legacy programs or applications, and we're trying to get newer applications for them. Some of these equipment that we were rolling out, the Spring Share applications, and not everyone had them. Other things, slow bandwidth in certain areas or frequent crashes were causing disruptions in our office. Other offices can do this work, but your office isn't equipped to do it remotely. We found some of those challenges. A lot of our staff were bringing their own device, BYOD, for example, iPhones, to breach the digital gap, but other colleagues didn't have that. There was a lack of instructional and IT support in some regards. We have IT support, but a lot of times it's overwhelmed or challenged. Also, an organizational thing can deal with stereotypes. They are too old, or you can just fill in the blank. They are XYZ, they are this or that. And in actuality, I think we need to go behind the scenes and see where is that gap. It's not necessarily because they're old. I had experience teaching an 80-year-old volunteer how to process our bound periodicals in our integrated library system. It took a little bit longer. She was a volunteer at our desks greeting visitors coming into the building, and I poached her from the visitor services and taught her how to do this instruction. Dealing with some of those stereotypes and overcoming them are really important, and mindsets. Sometimes they're thinking, well, I can't see what they're doing in telework. I have to watch them. Well, in real times on site, you're not always necessarily watching people. Another thing, teaching remotely, and I'm going to start moving into this segment now that I'm building awareness of this digital divide and this gap. I want to see what we're looking at as far as building a safe learning environment for those people who are in the digital divide on the other side. We want to provide phone and email support for them when they hit a roadblock, so they feel comfortable in reporting their problems without blame. This is so important, as they're very reticent about letting anyone know that there's something they're not comfortable with. So it's a lot of one-on-one interaction. Also, I've worked behind the scenes to create individual development plans with skill gaps, and then sequential instruction to gain proficiency. So if there's someone who you're going to be working with on a continuing basis, for example, add an attachment to an email. When did you want that? When do you file management, creating folders, the date that they complete that, and that sort of thing in that individual development plan. Because with people in the gap, it's so important to pick them up where they are, and then build sequentially on the skills they're missing to bring them to proficiency. Also, one of the things to consider as you're teaching remotely to those in the gap, the first thing was to learn to use the virtual meeting platform. We're just looking at it now, but I think we can remember just some of the glitches we faced as we started out. Zoom is so much more robust than it was in March 2020. So one of the things I did was to send a graphic around and make sure that each of the buttons was clearly identified, where to click to appear on camera, the most important parts of the camera, the mic, and the screen sharing, and how they could share their screen. We're thinking about it as presenters now, but to me, it was critically important that when I would teach something to them and share my screen, right away afterwards and individually, I would go back and have them share their screen, and they would start to tell me what was the next step. And I was able to see it, and if it was right, they would proceed, but I had them go through the process, and it transferred that learning much more easily. Also, one of the things to consider when you're teaching those in the gap is to use very familiar images and think of what it looked like on site. What was it like when you left to participate in this virtual environment? And I want to have that experience. So I had images from where we were. This is our reference desk in our reading room. And I needed to get plexiglass for that screen area. And actually they put the plexiglass on the side. And I realized they just needed an image to know exactly where the plexiglass was supposed to go. So I used one of my images and just some screen capture software with, you can use Paint or other things where you just put in a block with clear instruction, and right away that was no longer a problem. So a lot of times you can quickly on the fly create images with instructions that can be emailed ahead, or after a problem is recognized with those in the gap, to overcome that problem. For group instruction, what I do is send the instructional materials ahead of time, and they're fairly detailed with screen captures and step-by-step instructions. And then I advise them about demonstrating the new interface in the virtual meeting. And then I advise them that I'm going to provide one-on-one instruction afterwards and let them share their screen so they can show me how they can navigate. That way it takes the pressure off of trying to ask questions in a group setting where it may appear that they aren't up to speed with what's happening or they missed something. And of course they can ask questions, but if they feel more comfortable afterwards, that's also quite acceptable. And one of the most important things that I have focused on in creating instruction is creating a sense of community. Because one of the things that happens with remote learning is people feel isolated. They feel like they're in the dark and they don't feel connected to their group. And actually in this image, I was teaching our Nairobi office staff how to create holding statements for holding records for bound periodicals. And this was in actually 2012. And I was not there. I photoshopped myself in at the front of the classroom there. And it looked like I was just chatting. This would be a preferred learning environment where instructors just kind of sitting there with everybody and we're just discussing what needs to be done and we're showing it on the screen. But I transferred this to the remote learning experience and sent this image and then was able to project it on my screen to them. It just built this sense of community. I also do this in our conference room. We've been meeting with staff meetings remotely, and we welcomed in a new staff member. And previously we had brought in refreshments to welcome a new staff member. So creating that sense of community is so important with remote instruction. And I wanted to approach this too as we're developing instructional content and actually teaching it. I subscribe heavily to the constructionist learning theories. There's the behavioralist where you just teach it, kind of like I'm doing now, but what this does is where you gain the attention. It's this Gagne's learning 9-step learning process. And it is just kind of keeping that at the back of the instructional goals all at the time, just gaining the attention of the learners. And right at the front, like I did, what are the objectives? What are you going to try to get out of this session? And then kind of thinking back about what did you know about this before, or where are we starting from and our starting point? And then you present the content and you provide learning guidance all the way through, practice, where they practice. And a lot of times my practice is done remotely. If they're fine with it, that's great. Some are, but others, I provide additional sessions where we practice one-on-one and I give feedback. And then I assess how that went. If someone asked for that particular instruction, as I did just recently with some contract staff on how they were to do very much that same thing of putting holding statements on records and binding details of titles and things like that in this other software. So how did they do after the instruction? And the person I was working with, the head of the contract, let me know how they did and which ones needed additional support. And what do you do to enhance retention? What are you trying to do to get that transfer to the job? Because it's one thing to view something as an instructional point, and what is it that transfers that to day-to-day ability to do that job at a high performance level? And I also subscribe to universal design principles. We design instruction. Of course, we are familiar with the Americans with Disability, but remote instruction provides even more challenges for us. we're teaching, I've taught in this contract situation with an interpreter in the virtual Zoom room. And I had to realize that as I provided the instruction, the interpreter had to use sign language for the remote learner. And then that person had to understand and interact with the interface and understand the instruction while the other learners were already interacting in the practice. And so I had slowed it down. I allocated more time because I realized that. I also sent the instructional content to the interpreter ahead of time, so that person would know how to put stuff about binding in the ABLE software, which wouldn't be a normal type of linguistic thing, perhaps the sign language interpreter would need to use. And also, we need to create clear and understandable designs that help people with all ages and abilities understand the work. And that's one of the things I found, that a lot of our interfaces are confusing. And so where is the gap on this particular one? Where do you click to book an appointment for a researcher to come into our reading room? And if anybody typed it in chat, you look across the top bar. Where am I going to click to book an appointment for the researcher? The reality is you don't click on appointments. You click on spaces. I'm going to book a space in the reading room for the researcher to come in. And even at the next level, it was confusing. Okay, well, I clicked on the spaces. Booking Explorer, should I click on that? No, actually where you click is on the booking grid and availability. So a lot of times in instruction, we're working around the design. Someone else thought this design worked well. They're usually very tech savvy and not cognizant of user-centric design. So the instructional component is looking at where would people miss the, where's the gap, in other words? Why aren't they connecting to this particular interface? And you're designing instruction around it. And I think Harad, my colleague here, alluded to this, that we have all these wonderful digital collections, and people don't really know how to interact with that interface. It's just out there. And so a lot of times we can quickly, if we use these screen capture software and put on these little instructions, quickly enable someone who is in a gap with this or unable to use it to very proficiently interact with it. And I look at places where it's confusing. Click the go button, you can actually change this to download different types of images, not just a PDF. You can do JPEGs, JPEG 2000s, but a lot of people don't know that. You can click about this item. It's kind of hidden behind the fold if you bring this up, and it's going to tell you about all the metadata that is about this, like the title, and the type of language, the types of subjects this is all about, that are very, very important. Another one, people don't know what these little buttons are all about at the top. They're even getting more and more obscure, like the more button on Zoom. What's under the more button? And that gentleman I talked about, what was quite easily solved by getting rid of all those pop-ups and things. They were called alerts. And I turned off his alerts. And he said, oh, I was going to have to take my computer to a friend to have him help me get rid of all those alerts, or even get a different browser. So these are kind of showstoppers to a lot of people. So if you can click the plus sign to enlarge the text, these really help enhance it. All this was about how you get the high quality images, the contributors, all of these things that are so important. I'd like to just finish this off with a little piece on advocating for digital equity, diversity, and inclusion in the workplace. A lot of the instruction I do is just completely backstage. It's hidden from view. And this addresses the remote learners who are in the digital divide. They don't want to be seen. They don't want their colleagues to know about it. That's absolutely fine with me. I'd rather have them go through these little learning modules and gain those skill sets. But we're in a situation where the digital divide is a human rights issue, and we're advancing social inclusion through advocacy. And the United Nations General Assembly declared access to the internet a basic human right in 2016. And there are people in our workplaces that do not have access to the internet at home, or do not have just what we take for granted, a device, or some have their phones. Most people have their phones, but they may not have a laptop that does all the sorts of things they need to have. And we need to identify staff without these devices and internet at home and advocate for them. How are they going to join the rest? And we did this as we moved forward with this telework environment, and all our staff in our division came into full telework conformance we went out in March. By July and August, all were online, all had laptops, and all were beginning to telework with projects that they could do remotely in telework, and kept building in the skills behind the scene. And the library was very, very good at pushing out. We have a system of online courses, online learning, and each week they'd push them out, but I would tailor it to the person and where their particular gaps were. We also rolled out a new application to get researchers these appointments in the reading room. And you have to identify and provide access to all the applications they need to help build their IT skills. And I advocated behind the scenes to some of our IT office about some of the types of monitors that were needed for staff when they came in, as well as in our reading room, some of the equipment that in the year that we've been out before we opened the reading room, some of the things that had fallen behind in the technology field, and what we needed for these specifically. And actually tomorrow, a person's coming in to give us a new computer upgrade to our scanning equipment that should make that operate a lot more quickly and easier. So also it's important to IT support services and identify all these gaps and how to use it in a remote environment, and advocating for your staff for instruction. A lot of it can be provided on the fly, but it's important to advocate out that who in a general sense needs to have this instruction to come to proficiency in the digital environment. So I'm open to questions and discussions, and thank you very much for your attention to this presentation. And I'll stop screen sharing here.
Thank you so much, Joan. That was great. So we'll move on to our third presentation in the program. And I'd like to introduce Jessica Holland, who is the Manager of Knowledge Production and Pedagogy at the Arab Studies Institute, and Reneta Din, who is the Project Manager for the Knowledge Production Project, also at the Arab Studies Institute, who will be sharing their presentation titled Knowledge Production Project, Identifying Trends in 2021.
Great, just bear with me while I share my screen, and then Reneta will start us off. Thank you. So while Jessica is doing that, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Reneta Din, Project Manager for the Knowledge Production Project at the Arab Studies Institute. And as you've seen with me, it's Jessica Holland, Manager for Knowledge Production and Pedagogy, also at the Arab Studies Institute. Today, the two of us will be speaking about the knowledge production project that we both have been involved in. But before we begin our presentation, I'd like to preface this by saying that while undoubtedly the past year and a half, 2 years have been a time of precarity for many educators and researchers, at the Arab Studies Institute in general and the Knowledge Production Project in particular, we have tried to see this as an opportunity. We are well aware of the fact that more and more people seek content online. They try to do their research online. And because of that, this has been served as an impetus for us to bolster our digital presence with more online content. This, of course, does not mean that we do not face any problems. Yes, we do. But we have been trying to really focus on building on what we have. And in the past 1 year, we embarked on a project of redesigning our website and data visualizations for the knowledge production project. So we built a new and improved data visualization. Our goal was to make it more user-friendly, to get the information, to get people to the information that they need faster. And we also launched a new podcast on knowledge production and pedagogy. So yes, we've been keeping ourselves busy. And my colleague Jessica will talk about these two projects in a bit. But first, I'll begin by briefly introducing the Arab Studies Institute. And then I will speak about the knowledge production project, what we do and how we do it. And after that, we'll share some insights about our most recent experience with data visualization redesign. And finally, we'll conclude with a discussion on KPP's impact and how our databases, data visualizations can be used for research. So what is the Arab Studies Institute? If you haven't heard of us, the Arab Studies Institute is a nonprofit organization that produces knowledge about the Middle East. It's an umbrella organization for 5 subsidiaries: the Arab Studies Journal, which is a peer-reviewed journal, Forum on Arab and Muslim Affairs, or FAMA, which is the research branch of ASI and where our project is situated, Jadaliya, which is an electronic magazine, Quilting Point, which produces audiovisual content, and Tadween Publishing, which is a publishing house. What is the Knowledge Production Project? So the Knowledge Production Project is a dynamic open access archive, search tool, and data visualization platform. This project is over a decade in the making, and it endeavors to gather, organize, and make available for analysis all knowledge produced on the Middle East since 1979 in the English language. I know it's quite bold. The project is primarily geared towards helping educators, researchers, and close observers of the region identify trends in knowledge production and understand how knowledge about the Middle East is impacted by its method of creation. Our archive is now composed of 11 separate databases or sources of knowledge production, and it systematically catalogs peer-reviewed articles, books, dissertations, translated books, book reviews, think tank publications, congressional testimonies, films and television programs, and websites. And now a little bit more about how we do things at KPP. We have 8 semi-autonomous teams consisting of a database coordinator and 1 or several research assistants, usually graduate students or undergraduate students. Each team has its own procedures for identifying sources, mining data, cataloging and coding entries, and maintaining quality control. Therefore, the sources and methodology vary by database. For example, some databases mine and enter the data manually, whereas others use a software called Zotero, which scrapes specified databases and pulls the relevant entries into a spreadsheet. And then the spreadsheet feeds into the data visualization that you see on our website. And by the way, the Library of Congress is one of our databases that we use, that we scrape to get for for our books database. Here's an example of the backend, what people do, our researchers do. This is the peer-reviewed articles database. This is what one of our original spreadsheets looks like. For each entry, we list information for author, title, journal, volume, issue, year, and tier. I'll explain what that is in a bit. And next slide, please. Starting in 2020, we will be adding abstracts and links to access the articles, and perhaps other fields such as keywords, country, and region. Those are not live yet. That's just on the back end at the moment, because one of the challenges is that these need to be standardized across all the databases, and that's a bit of a challenge for us. But the peer-reviewed articles database mines data from a growing list of 150 journals, and we have internally divided them into 3 categories. So the tier system is tier 1 journals, the journals that focus primarily on the Middle East, for example, the Arab Studies Journal, Middle East Quarterly. Tier 2 journals that focus on a major theme strongly associated with the Middle East, such as Journal of Terrorism and Political Violence. And tier 3 are disciplinary journals, or journals without a specific focus on the region. But they do occasionally publish relevant content. And so this was the back end, and now we will show you a short video of what the visualization looks like on our website. If you go to search.knowledgeproduction.com, you will see the visualization or heat map load up. The colors on the heat map vary from white to bright orange and signify the number of records. The search map is interactive and clickable. There are 2 views: accumulation, which displays, can you hear me? Displays records over time, and then year by year. There is a search bar, which allows users to type in a term and search our vast archive. Here, for example, you can see that when you search political violence, the map changes. It displays the number of records available for the search term per year and allows for year-to-year comparison. Below that, you can view the results by format, and you can even bookmark a specific title and save it for later. Once you reset, then the heat map returns the default state. And this is the first part of our data visualization. The second part is the think tanks Explorer, which, as you can see, we have 58 think tanks based in the US, UK, and Europe. You can explore revenue for specific years, or compare the number of congressional testimonies and publications that think tanks experts have produced. You can click on a specific think tank and view records of recent publications, congressional testimonies, and finances. You can also compare revenue between 2 think tanks. For example, you can compare RAND Corporation and Amnesty International and see the year-on-year differences, which is quite a stark contrast between those 2. But this was the second part of the visualization. And I believe we'll now move on to the third part, which is called policy networks. It's still, we call it a beta version because we're working to improve it, to make it even more user-friendly. This is an interactive visualization which allows users to explore the connections between think tanks, government bodies, and the people who staff them. The data for this is from 2012 and 2013, but we plan on making a new version for 2022-2023. And it would take, if you take the US State Department, for example, you can click on it and you can see all the think tanks and the experts associated with that government institution. So you can you can explore the impact of specific networks of experts, think tanks, and government departments on how policies created and enacted in the US. There is a sidebar where you can click any hyperlink term to remodel the visualization with that institution or expert at its center. So yeah, that's basically it. So in summary, as you can see, from simple searches to more complex comparative functions, the knowledge production project has these data visualizations, and we hope to advance careful and inventive research objectives. And I will hand over to Jessica, who will speak a little bit more about our most recent experience with the data visualization redesign. Take it away, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you, Reneta. So just in coming out of the video, I've now come out slightly of the Google slides presenting. So our efforts to have a seamless transition there have slightly hit a bump, but I'm sure you'll forgive us. So yes, here we go. So yeah, I'm Jessica. Thank you for the introduction there, Reneta. And it's a real pleasure to be with you all discussing sort of compelling and urgent work of library and archive and information professionals in these challenging and different years. So I'd like to take you through some of the how behind the video that Reneta just showed you of the sort of exciting new data visualizations that we've put together in the past year. They basically transform 150,000 records into these really visually compelling and interactive visualizations for anyone to explore. And basically, since March of this year, we focused on redesigning the existing visualizations, which is the stream graph that you can see to the left, and relaunching with a newer and more fit for purpose website with a series of different visualizations specific to each part of the KPP project's work. And I would be interested perhaps to see what Joan thinks of our new website in terms of the different suitabilities for different types of users. I really like the focus on kind of user-centric design in your presentations. I'm sure you'll have perhaps some feedback on ours, but yeah, it is. We're trying to improve it to make it more user-friendly, but that is a constant task. So here we go. So because of the pandemic, as Reneta mentioned, we had a greater focus on our digital offerings, which was a benefit, but at the same time, because of some grant funding restrictions, we had to implement the initial project in an extremely tight time span. So from design to development and launch in less than 3 months. So for those of you who might be interested in transforming your records databases into online data visualizations, we thought we'd provide a sort of simple timeline of our project that might be useful. So we began the data cleaning preparation work in March and April of 2021. And that was while we were in early talks with the Data Visualization Studio, Pitch Interactive. And then the design began in May with Pitch, and we started to review static wireframes, usually in a sort of PDF format, or perhaps in Illustrator being shared directly from the designer's screen. And we do this with in weekly calls with the studio. And then once most of those design decisions had started to be agreed upon, the studio began developing the live coded versions of visualizations, plugging in real KPP data using those clean databases. And this meant that we were able to zoom forward into a soft launch of the new site at the end of June, allowing us a little bit of breathing space to do a further round of data cleaning in July and to work on some inconsistencies that the kind of deep dive of the data visualization development process had thrown up there. And then the studio then re-indexed the data in August, meaning that they performed a re-upload of the clean data, which increased the accuracy of the visualizations and also slightly improved the search performance as well. As I'm sure you're all familiar, these sort of online tools live and die by the quality of the search performance. So it's something we are continuing to work on as we move into the fall, into October. And one of the second priorities for our version 2 or stage 2 perhaps of the project is also some public engagement, of which you're the first participating in one of the first instances of. So I'll just give a summary of what we were able to achieve in that first 3 months, which was a searchable archive and multiple data visualizations of those 150,000 records, a think tanks explorer, which Reneta's demonstrated some features of, and finally the immersive policy networks data visualization, which obviously is quite different in terms of being a 3D or a mock 3D space that users can explore and interact with. And given the presumed audience of MELA, I wanted to include a close-up on the search parameters that we have prioritized for the moment for this phase 1. And these, so the ones that we provided for the users to change or tick and untick as they like, are title, author, publisher, abstract, keywords, date range, and peer-reviewed only. And this peer-reviewed only box we thought would be particularly useful for perhaps lecturers who using the tool might guide their students to select this box, which would then give them predominantly journal articles from peer-reviewed journals or academic books that have been subjected to peer review. And then we also included a toggle for contains versus exact match for search terms, again with that aim of increasing discoverability. And then if anyone is interested, we're using Elasticsearch to power these functions. And then here, I'd just like to make a slight contrast to illustrate the different types of data visualizations that we've used. So for the financial features, we've gone for a much more simple data visualization, simple ways of making the data understandable, something that perhaps a third grader would recognize as sort of plotting a line chart, which is quite a contrast to the more complex and visually impactful heat map that you see when you first enter the site, that sort of ripple effect of different colors, or the immersive 3D space of the policy networks visualization. And essentially, we found the whole process of sort of treading a line between providing the information in a clear and accurate way, and providing something which sort of encourages users to start thinking about the trends that they can draw from this material, and that being one of our key aims of the project. So to go briefly on to lessons learned, as much as we'd love to continue to list the achievements of the project amongst our peers at conferences, it's quite tempting to do that. But I think it's also quite useful to often talk a little bit about when things have gone wrong, or perhaps mishaps to avoid in other projects if others in the community are thinking about going forward with data visualization projects of their own. So there's 3 key lessons. One, to begin by setting really clear expectations, both internally and externally, having a really realistic plan of what you want to and can accomplish within the different timeframes of your project, perhaps breaking it up into different phases and having smaller, more achievable goals within each phase. Communication, so asking questions and raising issues really early on. It's important to be aware that you're working with people from quite different specialisms and that you might have to illustrate your points in a different way to accommodate for this. And we found this particularly important when we were moving from the sort of static design phase, where the studio was sharing PDFs versions of, what they'd designed based on our requirements, based on our discussions, before moving into actually coding those in with live data, at which point it was much more difficult to go back and change things, oh no, we actually want that search box over here, etc. So just kind of as usual, communication is key. And then finally, and I'm sure this will be familiar to everybody on the call, data cleanup always takes longer than you think. So maybe worth building in some contingency time there as well. Excuse me. I'm recovering from a cold at the moment, so I'm hoping my voice will last. So finally, just to give an example of this, for our online sources, this is a one format from out of the 11 databases. 10 out of them work very, very well with a chronological visualization, which was that heat map we saw at the beginning. Everything essentially hangs on the publication date of the item, this being a project focusing on the production of knowledge. Essentially having a production date works quite well. But unfortunately for online sources, excuse me, that doesn't work quite as well. So at the moment in our phase 2, this is one of our key areas to be working on. And essentially we worked to reach the minimum viable product within the original time constraint. Excuse me, sorry. Okay, wonderful. So the last part of our presentation today, part 4, I'd like to really reiterate the role that librarians, archivists, and information professionals have to play in both the consumption and the production of knowledge, as well as the way that it's taught. And I think we can all agree that knowledge production is very rarely an impartial process. So that role of the librarian as sort of gatekeeper in this is really important. KPP allows users to analyze trends in what kinds of knowledge are being produced about the Middle East, and whether that knowledge is in the form of academics publishing articles, think tank experts testifying before Congress, or US government institutions making policy informed sometimes by think tank experts or those academics. So using these new series of data visualizations, researchers, students, and the public can now explore how select people and institutions end up shaping public perceptions of the region. So you have to forgive me, almost there. Oops. Oh, that was slightly faster than intended. Okay, so here are some active examples of how the KPP databases and visualizations are being used in contemporary research and teaching. So the resources at KPP fuel the production of guides for educators on another ASI project, which is the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative. And they produce bouquets of topics on, recommended articles on timely topics such as race and gender, as well as central themes in Middle East pedagogy. And then secondly, this is a very new project of ours, but working with Dr. Alejandro Paz at the University of Toronto, we're running a Twitter crawl project exploring the epistemics of sourcing in publications written by both think tank experts and journalists based on their Twitter feeds, essentially mapping citations and coming up with analysis both to be visualized in a similar way to the data visualizations that we've been speaking about today, and also as findings more generally. And then finally, oh, excuse me, that was a link out. The podcast, which we've launched last month, and this is basically activating the KPP website and databases by reaching out to a broader data science and scholarly community to discuss questions ignited by the project. And it's run with our partners at George Mason, as well as 2 other ASI departments, Jardelier and Status Hour. And you can catch the next episode on Jardelier's Facebook page in November. So here are all of our email addresses, and please do get in touch if you have any questions that you think of later, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Reneta. That was amazing. Looking forward to the Q&A period. But first, our last presentation of the day is from Layli Saifi, Associate Professor in Library and Information Science at Birjan University in Iran, who will be sharing her presentation titled "The Role of Iranian Rural Public Libraries in Development of the Rural Economy." Take it away. I think there's maybe a delay in your screen sharing. Maybe, do you want to try initiating it? Oh, there we go. Now I can see your screen. Just need to get, yeah.
So can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Can
And
you
my screen is there?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to get the opportunity to present my result of my research with you. The topic of my presentation is the role of Iranian rural public libraries in the development of the rural economy. So. Sorry, I just can't. Can you see my screen? Hello.
Hi, yeah, we can see your screen. It looks like it is, your presentation is loaded as a tab on Internet Explorer, but we're still able to see your screen.
I don't know what happened, like, let me, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to this. Just a minute. I'm not very familiar with this Zoom.
No problem. Was it a PowerPoint presentation?
Just a minute.
It looked,
yes, PowerPoint, but I'm not able to share.
You had a PDF up with the slides, and you could just scroll down through the PDF.
Yes.
We saw the second slide.
No, this
That's
now
fine.
it's okay.
Yes, that's fine. No. If that's
okay,
your second
fine.
slide, and then when you're finished with that slide, you can scroll down to the next one. We'll be fine.
Yes, it's fine now, I think. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to present you about result of my research. First of all, I'm going a brief history of public libraries in Iran. Public libraries in Iran have a prominent status, literacy level, and awareness of the segments of options in the contemporary world for presenting free and equal service to all individuals. Currently, there are approximately 3,500 public libraries in Iran, and 2.5% of the Iranian population who have access to libraries are members of Iranian public libraries. The financial resources are supplied through a special budget of parliament and 0.5% of the revenues of municipalities. So providing library services to rurals in Iran, like in many other countries, was initially mobile-based library. And for the first time in 1946, a foundation called the Near East Foundation set up mobile libraries in the Varamin region around Tehran, the capital of Iran. So the activities of this foundation continued until 1966, and they helped community expectations by meeting the information needs of local business owners and job seekers in order to achieve local developments. And in 1975, the General Directorate of Vocational Education of Women, under the supervision of the Ministry of Culture, distributed and sent books in some villages in order to promote the knowledge of rural women. At present, the foundation of Iranian public libraries are in charge of the construction and development of rural libraries. So economic development is generally a tripartite effort to maintain and develop and create new businesses, and with the goal of increasing people's income and well-being. Therefore, in order to achieve the desired economic growth through the rural public libraries, the concept of library as a source of information for the community should be recognized. What in this research, I must explain you that I did this research as a research project, and I used a systematic review and observation tools. So what I did, the West, South, and East public libraries, that what they are really doing and exactly what kind of services giving to the society. But as I surveyed the literature review showed that, confirmed that identifying information needs on businesses, changing community attitudes towards traditional library roles, development of library service, improvement of the society, and training and raising the awareness of librarians and staff to understand the new roles. So this was the small or brief explanation of the result of our literature review. And so based on the observation and this systematic review, the main findings of this result was some important services that rural public libraries should have play in developing rural economy. In training services like activities such as self-study and also lifelong learning was recommended to the library. And the second role or services was literacy services. In this service, by promoting literacy or as a skill in managing new activities, could economy. And the next one was information service. Could do is that ensure all citizens and special groups to related information, and also provide opportunities for getting appropriate information and appropriate information for business owners. So in the next aspect of role of public libraries was development of human capital skills. What libraries in this aspect can do is that like with creating opportunities for individual growth and also training programs, they could help for development of rural economy. And the other one was consulting and reference services, like with business consulting or provide networking opportunities in businesses. And the other role was research and study activities. In research and study that provide research support for all entrepreneurs and small owners, like business owners. And the other one was equipment and facilities. In equipment and facilities, they could serve the community with virtual services, virtual facilities, and also physical facilities. And the last one was information technology services that based on infrastructure, training and facilities, they could serve to the community. So this was the main findings of this research, and some recommendations that based on like experience of these small business owners, and also some research that recommended was conducting workshops in the field of developing local businesses such as mushroom breeding training or etc. And identifying the training needs for job seekers, supporting the job information, needs of local entrepreneurs, develop marketing and sales strategies, training librarians to serve the needs of the business community, including public relations skills, familiarity with specific resources required by business customers, familiarity with business terms, and etc. And creating online discussion groups with the aim of inviting local entrepreneurs to share their experiences for job seekers, and also holding exhibitions of business services to the market. This was some part of my research, and in this part, I'm going to share with you some experiences of rural public libraries, what they really in a real world they are serving to our local community in Iran. And as I said, they were like all part of Iran, like west, east, south, north, and so I just select some libraries for sharing here. Like they were training traditional medicine, like conducting traditional medicine training, cooperation with the regions, ecotourism base, and small business training for mothers, silkworm breeding training, conducting entrepreneurship classes. And you know, these libraries which providing these kind of trainings, what was the result of these trainings? That most of them, they were telling that we, after this training program, we were able to conduct our small business, and if we had already this business, we could able to develop and earn really like income for our life. And another example was some other libraries were doing like a kind of home businesses, because some of them for running a small business like home businesses, especially rural women that they are really like a housewife, they really required some literacy, computer literacy information, and so these libraries provided for them this kind of classes, and then business. And the other example, again, one library, rural library, provided facilities. This was very interesting for myself too, that what they did, that they provide a place, like physical place, as you see in the picture. And in these places, they were able to run their small business, because these rural people, they didn't even have place to run small businesses. So what library did for them, provide place, and also some small like facilities for running this kind of business. So as you see in the picture, weaving carpet, and beekeeping, and embroidery, and carpentry was the businesses that libraries help them to run base. And another example, again, promoting and training. Needlework is one very, very important handicraft that many of Southeast rural women, they do in Iran. And it's very, very very difficult work and needs really a lot of efforts. So what libraries, again, these rural libraries do for them. First, the women that really expert in this train to other, like youth people and other people in their community. And also what the library do for them is that promote this work, this artwork on the website, on the virtual environment to all community in Iran. So people, they come to know, and sometimes they help to even some of the products they upload on the website for something like promoting this important artwork. And another interesting thing that the library, they do, rural library, that in this part, libraries gave some of facilities, their facilities, barbershops in rural. So with this kind of service, people who come to libraries, who come to barbershops can read books and also promote. And this barbershop man used to say that with this activity, my income really increased, and many people referring to my barbershops. And another example again was this handicraft course, many handicraft course, and they directly libraries directly created employment. Most of these people could get after courses they trained and also get the jobs. And again, holding a handicraft exhibition was another example that library in the libraries was conducted by the librarian, mothers, and members of the library. And so all products that rural women had and made by themselves, in this exhibition, they could sell and earn income. And crochet training was another program in some other libraries that they used to teach to youth and the daughters, women, rural women, and they could run their small businesses. And felt embroidery training was again another program that libraries used to conduct in the inside of, as you see, run these businesses. So with this presentation, I just wanted to share these experiences because really rural libraries, in spite of having a really less budget of amount of budget, but they are really in some part of Iran, they are really supporting this rural community. And I think they should be more rural libraries really can play important role in the community. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and any questions, most welcome.
Thank you so much, Lily. That was wonderful. I know we've gone a little bit over time, but I did want to make space for questions if any of the attendees would like to ask any of our speakers anything. We do have some comments in the chat directed at specific speakers, but before I read them, I'll open it up to attendees. If you want to unmute yourself and share a question, please feel free. Robin, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
Thanks. I just have first off, all fabulous presentations. Thank you all so much. I have a specific question for for Jessica and Reneta about the chronology of your KPP. I'm so sorry if you said it, I missed it. Why did you pick 1979 as your starting date?
Hi, that's a good question. So we had to pick a date, basically where we could possibly find relevant content. And sometimes it's hard to find, first of all, relevant content going back and back that's available, that easily accessible. But we did pick 1979 because, so I think the idea was to pick 1980 forward. But 1979 was the Iranian Revolution, so that was kind of, the, I guess, an important year that the people who created the Knowledge Production Project decided to start as a starting point. This doesn't mean that there isn't important scholarship prior to that, but there had to be some limits set, and that was what they had agreed on.
Thank you for.
It's really helpful to say that the project has been going for about 10 years. So the previous visualizations website that I briefly referred to was the sort of first iteration, and this is kind of 10 years later, moving into its 11th year now. So yeah, things are kind of a lot. I think almost all of the people that have been working on the project since then have changed in that time.
Mm-hmm.
During Keith's presentation, Dale had a question, and that was, how are checkout data for European language studies of and from the Middle East? Do they outpace vernacular checkouts?
They do. I don't have specific data on that at the moment, but they do outpace them per my conversations with Tim Morton. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
I had a comment and question. Joan, if you remember, we had a number of people who were interested in getting into various digital items that apparently were only available on site. So it really looked like it was available, and then you would go to the item and there was this little notice that said only available on site. I'm wondering if you could throw out a word or two. I had several people actually from the MELA community contact me for Iranian Afghan journals that were done initially, and then we decided to put it into the on-site only database. So this is one thing. For Barry Sarkam Kharum Seifi, this is for Ms. Seifi. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It almost feels like these libraries are more community centers, and they do financial as well as community development, as well as librarian work. Could you give us a sense, contrast-wise, how different the urban and big city library systems are from the rural ones? And if you need me to say it in Persian, I'm happy to say it in Persian as well. Thank you.
I can be quick about it and then let Leo. I think that would be more fascinating, perhaps, very quickly. We have databases that are available on site at the Library of Congress, and there's also databases that have free access for remote users. And the ones that are on site only access, it's because of copyright protections. And we've sent dozens of periodicals from all over the Middle East that are printed on newsprint instead of thinking of them as paper, like a Time magazine on glossy paper. And those are very fragile, and we had this opportunity to digitize them, but they're under copyright protection. So now they're in this what we call Stacks 3.0 environment. And if you were trying to get a list of those out, they don't have holding statements. So when you search in the catalog, or if you find one, you can contact us and we'll try to let you know what we have in there. We're trying to devise a system where at least we could let you know what holdings are available in that Stacks. So I'll turn it over to you, Layla, to give us a little bit of background on the Iranian city libraries versus the rural ones.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
به روی چشم به فارسی میکنم چون راحت تره شاید. به نظر میاد که کتابخونه هایی که هستن در شهرستان ها و مناطق کوچیک مثل برامین بیشتر چه بهش میگن کامیونیتی سنتر، یا اینکه همه جور حرفه ها رو در واقع روش کار میشه در کنار کتابداری. کتابخونه های شهرهای بزرگ مثل تهران، اونها چجوری عمل میکنن و چقدر فرق دارن با این کتابخونه های محلی؟
I must explain answer about the question that asked from me about the system of libraries, like public libraries and also rural public libraries in small cities. I must tell you that actually rural public libraries are under supervision of foundation, because in Iran the system of libraries is that foundation of public libraries are in charge of all public libraries. So rural public libraries are part of these public libraries that management. But the management way is centralized. It means that the budget support from, like as I said, a small budget from Parliament and the 0.5% from municipally. And but what I explained you about this my project, that rural libraries most of the time they get donations also. It means that from like rural areas, some people always are there to help. With this help, they just do such activities, like for example helping economic development. And nowadays in Iran, this local development, I mean based on economy, rural economy, is major, I would say major ambitions of people, because we have lots of inflation and other things that you may know about that. So people, some people can use, and so libraries help. It doesn't mean that rural libraries are doing it separately from public libraries. They are under public libraries. I don't know if I could explain the way of management of our public libraries. And if you need more information, I can provide.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our speakers?
Welcome.
Going once? All right, well, if there are no questions for our speakers, I just want to give you all another round of applause. Thank you for these presentations. They were so wonderful and so engaging and interesting. And I'm just really looking forward to keeping up with all of this work that you're doing. For other attendees wishing to come to our next panel, the next panel will be happening at 3 p.m. Eastern time and will be our last conversation of the day on cataloging. So thank you all so much for this, and have a terrific rest of your day. Thank you for your time and your insights. We appreciate you.